Hey associates, today I am going to watch back for the first time, actually ever, my dissertation defense. I defended in 2021, and so it did still have to be a virtual defense, and so my presentation was over Zoom to my committee, and then technically as a public link, mostly as my family watching, and I'm just going to go through and kind of critique, judge, discuss my own presentation skills, my own slide deck, and yeah, just kind of think about probably one of the most important presentations that I have given in my life, and it was all recorded, so let's just kind of watch and check it out. I guess I published it January 23rd, 2022, but I actually did the defense in October or November of 2021, and then I had graduated. So let's hop in.
All right, thank you so much, the committee, for being here and finding a time that we could come together. And of course, guests, thank you for joining this presentation as well. Yeah, I'm Haley Blackburn, she, her, and this about 30-minute talk is going to go through.
What a boring title slide, cover slide. But some of the good things about it, of course, name super clear, the title, so definitely thinking about obviously the title of your work, titles of your slide deck presentations, just like kind of the title or subject line of anything, making sure we understand what it is. My research was called Popcorn Thoughts, because I like to be cheeky at the front end, podcast economy of film criticism. So yeah, I still feel like I got all the key buzzwords in there, and the branding's all right, but this slide deck is not capturing a lot of attention. I would definitely, and then go back and change it.
All right, so with the research context methods, there's kind of 4 key items to situate this work. And the first one is podcasts, my podcast in general. And so a podcast is a term.
So yeah, I kind of proud I had done this. I like this part. In this section, I like just learned. I remember kind of a YouTube tutorial. I'll like link it below, but how to sort of make it look like page turning as a transition, to kind of talk about those 4 sections of the background kind of literature. And so we have like the little podcast section. I do like, they just have one giant sort of graph going on. We have not a lot of like action, I suppose, happening. And I don't necessarily see like a strong story, so we'll see if I kind of capture the data story that I want here, but at least it is like a big kind of graph that I did recreate rather than just copying the like Pew Research Center's graph, so that way it would look a lot crisper in the slide deck and hit the right color scheme. So yay me there. Let's see how this transition goes.
That was really coined in 2004. It did combine iPod with broadcast, but we can now listen to podcasts on all sorts of different devices, mediums. I use Spotify with my Google Pixel primarily, or desktop. But podcasts have really captured a lot of the imagination and kind of the way that we communicate and explore media in the past 5 years, especially. And part of that is because a podcast is this.
So I feel like this slide deck doesn't do a good job. Like it doesn't align with what I've been verbally talking about during this whole section. Like I'm really going into kind of the prior research, discussing, but the slide that we're looking at, continues just to be this kind of larger thing about podcast listenership. And so if I could go back and give myself like a critique, some advice, I feel like I would have put more slides in my deck, number one, so that way I could keep things moving visually a little bit more. And like we've been on this one slide and I don't think we've even talked about the graph, and I've been talking for like 90 seconds on it, so that's definitely not great.
Criticism, specifically film criticism, is that other kind of really intersecting area. And that's because, one, there was
All right, well, I don't like bullet points on my slide decks. It's just like, ugh, bar so low, really boring. So I would definitely probably redo this. I don't know. I mean, it's fine. It definitely gets the job done. But even me, I'm like reading ahead, listening to myself, and like already annoyed at myself because I'm done like reading the slide before I've even like finished talking about it.
Has to be contextualized. The podcasters talked about COVID quite frequently. They refer to the ways that they missed, and in some cases didn't miss going to movie theaters, and certainly recognize that it was disrupting our.
I do like this, at least this kind of like quote clearly connects with what I'm saying and gives like, voice from, I guess, the data I collected. And I would just like redesign it to better show that it is a quote and be a little bit more interesting, using some better like layering, kind of images, that sort of stuff. But I like this idea of a slide definitely a lot better.
And especially our ideologies are formed.
Speed
and
my playback up a little bit.
Talk about these films, how we choose to sort of support or replicate or oppose the messages and the meanings all go into that critical cultural paradigm and how power operates. So that's kind of the big picture. Just remember, qualitative, critical, and then the method was a digital ethnography.
I'm making really good eye contact with the camera though, so. And most importantly, I knew what I was talking about, right? I had spent so much time with my research, and I was really just having that conversation of what I had learned and just telling them what I needed to tell them. So I do like that I was doing that. Ooh.
During this time-based, when I was in the field for my ethnography, there can be a lot.
That was kind of fun, just do that fun transition. And so at least, I call it like the Harry Potter transition because it always reminds me of Voldemort doing his little name thing. But I do like using that kind of morph transition. I like just learned how to do it. So I think I relied on it a lot, but I still think that it is kind of a nice way to sort of symbolize how one set of like text on one slide literally like connects and the letters move and build into the other, but it definitely is something that could be overused, but at least it adds a little bit of interest.
What they were doing and what their patterns were. And so while I did actively
so this slide, I do not like how the lines got broken. Like it would be such easy for me to just like expand out the text box so that way the lines don't break. I don't know why I didn't go back and do that. I do know it's because even though I put a lot of effort, of course, into this work, my slide decks, I obviously did not go through as many kind of rounds, iterations, editing, kind of thought into the slide deck itself. Ugh, 2 out of 10 for that one.
Notebook with all of my field notes in it, as a good ethnographer needs to have to keep track of everything. But then I also created a digital code book, the definitions and the code within it.
With the code book slide, I wouldn't change anything about this. I think it served exactly the purpose that I wanted, which is, I do not expect my readers, my audience to like actually read all of this. It's way too much information. That's kind of the point. It's like I really wanted to emphasize how much information I collect, and not in a way that they're like supposed to be reading on the slide deck, more of like a wow factor. I think that I would probably just like bring the attention back to me, maybe add like a desaturation, so it's like bam, the color, mention, hey, this is my code book, right? I did all of this collection, and then maybe like turn it to grayscale or even blur it a little bit so that way they aren't focused on trying to read what's in there, and the attention can go back to me as a speaker.
Were constantly kind of recreated by my observations. My sample, I had 5 very carefully, purposefully chosen case studies that were selected with a lot of theory in mind, as well as thinking about, and it was hosted by Sean Fennessy, who was the editor.
Okay. I get, like, it's fine. I'm, like, not super whelmed, I guess, by what I designed here, but I do think it has, like, the core information, right? You can see who it is, a publisher, some of those key details. I do like that I grabbed the customer kind of reviews, the podcast review ratings, and blew it up. And then I have the quote of basically their like tagline. And I would like redo this whole slide though to be a lot easier to see the flow of information, probably putting the quote maybe up front, so you understand like the context and then get into some of the data, really just change the layout. Like I'm merely whelmed by it. It's not the worst, but I would definitely redo it. Oh, so one little thing that I just did there, that actually I've used quite a bit. It definitely has helped me out a lot. I do have one like earbud. I have like Google Buds, but AirPod kind of situation in my ear, and I joined the meeting on my phone, and so I actually am kind of like a live broadcaster or a live performer. I am literally hearing and listening to the audio of myself talk in my earpiece. And so, I had it up and I glanced at my phone watch just to make sure the screen's still sharing properly and, the sound is all right and I'm, saying everything, nothing's getting cut out. And so I have seen myself like adjust it a few times, but overall it's pretty discreet and just gives me that really good kind of peace of mind because I'm literally like live audio checking myself as I give the presentation.
Whole sample ended up with 55 hours of audio that he experienced 47.
I feel like kind of like lazy and uncreative during this whole slide deck. And so here, right, this could have been a great opportunity instead of just having the data stand out with a small color change. I could have put, huge sort of numbers and use some like overlap and some layering and, kept the slides like moving a little bit more. I think I could have made that stand out a lot better with different design than just like plopping a sentence on an otherwise empty slide deck.
Episodes and 204 tweets. All right, let's get to the meat of it. So the first kind of category of research questions really focus and emphasize the activities of the critics. Again, thinking about how they talk.
And then, again, same comments. I'd say this one I probably would leave just because given the audience, it's like it is important that they get the exact kind of research questions that I was working with, and I don't want to necessarily go too creative with that.
Work. And the top two most common sort of episode genre types that I found were a critical review, very legacy, that's where we deconstruct the narrative.
So here, right, I have my graphs, but I actually set it to, animate in by category, like kind of like when you do it by paragraph or text, but this time on the graph, you can actually tell it to animate in like all at once in different directions or by different variables, different categories. So that way I can at least talk through. So I'm definitely happy, yay past me, that I didn't just put the whole entire graph up. Because that would have definitely distracted from the sections I was discussing and just focused on the pieces of the graph at that moment.
And production choices, focus on storytelling, as well as a movie review, very kind of classic. And so the big picture, really is that they are following some legacy routines. They can recognize what they're doing.
So here, I'm verbally telling the data story, but it would be nice if on the slide deck then I transition changes that way the data story, that kind of big picture that I'm verbally saying is also very clearly represented in the slide. So it's like complementing and spotlighting what it is I'm saying. And instead of like keeping this chart up, which, every time you have like a chart, people inherently are likely to kind of tune out a little bit as they start unpacking and like picking apart the data that they feel like looking at. So I definitely would make that change just to help reinforce like the big picture story that I, cared about, wanted them to care about, rather than just like leaving it up here and kind of static.
The other big thing in terms of their activities is what they did, were very separate from the organization and where they're coming from. And so very quickly.
Yeah, that's another place. Like, I think that I could have fixed it with just simply more slides in my slide deck and keep it moving through a lot better. But I have the slide up, I'm like actually giving all this background, I'm talking about it, and so this kind of visual is just sitting there like waiting for me instead of actually like interacting with what I'm saying. And so I probably would go back and add a slide that helps like visualize this idea of the habitus, so that way it fits like the definition that I'm discussing, and then I would like show them this actual slide once I'm ready to actually talk about what it meant.
The next set of questions is really about their engagement with the community and some of the influences and kind of micro celebrity. And so these podcasts, they provided to various extents insight into the production, so a little behind the scenes content, explaining how they choose.
I definitely kind of understand why I went with the Venn diagram, but we'll see. Well, I don't really remember. I don't think I do anything interesting with it. But, it's like if you're going to have a Venn diagram, then make sure that you show what is important in the overlapping sections. And at least on the slide so far, it doesn't seem like I am actually like doing anything with the Venn diagram. It doesn't seem like I'm actually trying to show and visualize where anything kind of sits sort of in the middle or at those interesting intersections. I'm definitely not maximizing kind of the power and the reason to have a Venn diagram, because I definitely do not seem to be locating anything in the overlap. So, it's fine.
Is their level of direct engagement. And so it was certainly possible with the technological infrastructure to include voicemails, the voice of the audience.
Yeah, okay, so just adding on to what I was saying after listening to a bit more, like it would have been really cool if I had actually taken examples from the sample, because I have them, and say, okay, here's an example of people that are really heavy on direct engagement and conversation, but I barely knew anything about their production, or, actually using the Venn diagram to then also give some examples, and like, right, maybe I zoom in, put another slide where it's like, and here's what it looks like when they do this or that, I think would have really helped this slide deck or presentation.
The episode and allow it to shift the discourse, show me the meaning that often. Now, one thing where I really saw kind of that you could keep it and laugh in relation to the audience. And so in this case, the discourse has direct feedback and comments all points of view and what that social relationship can be and influence the dynamic at all. And the last research question was really about their contributions to this ecosystem of media. They were really quick and easy to recognize and fall into. And I do find that this framework of niches could be well applied to other spaces and other studies and kind of types of criticism. Now, a
lot of words on the page. Probably should have used animation to introduce all of the kind of like text heaviness as I was going. Again, I'm like reading ahead, not really listening to myself. It's just like too much on this one slide. I should have broken it up.
All right, we're down to the last two slides. We're almost here, post-credit scenes. And so that answer, you want to go back to that nice quick research.
So I like this. This, I think, to me is a better version of the bullet points without being bullet points. But again, I could like introduce them as I'm talking so people aren't reading ahead.
Once you read, you tell people, people do podcasts over the film. They're allowing us to spend our time with the film, telling me about it through specific lenses. And I'm just kind of looking forward again to other research agenda items. So first, keep studying this Google podcast more.
Voice persona. Big picture, right? The symbols that I chose don't immediately kind of make sense or like communicate the message. Whenever you're picking kind of just like symbols for your slide deck, also make sure it's something that, is memorable and somebody will kind of inherently know what you're talking about, which I don't feel like I did a good job of that right now.
All right. 34, pretty close. I just want to thank everybody again so much for being here. And specifically, just thank you to my committee.
Cool. All right. Well, that was me kind of reacting to my dissertation slide deck. Some things that I definitely would go back and fix and change. Again, I think, overall, obviously it was good enough. I did pass my defense. I did earn my doctorate. But I would definitely go back with a lot more like, time, attention, creative energy, looking back now and change a lot of those things. Specifically, I think the biggest issues that I had in my slide deck were one, not enough slides. I actually did not have enough slides in the deck, which meant I stayed on the same slide for a long period of time, sometimes like 90 seconds or more, sort of like discussing, talking about it, which doesn't sort of give the audience a good opportunity to stay engaged. And it also meant that my slide deck, what they were seeing on the screen, wasn't always perfectly like in sync or representing or highlighting what I was verbally saying. So, if I could go back and do this again, I would add quite a few more slides. So that way, I'm just like moving through, changing it up a lot more often, and making sure it's always kind of emphasizing. The other thing that I would change, it is still quite text heavy, and without like having to be, like it wasn't bad. I definitely, there's only a couple slides that had just like bullet points and like tons of text, but even then, I would definitely go back and use a lot more like visual imagery, a lot more like objects, layering to better kind of represent what I was saying and maybe try to reduce some of the words. I think just overall, it's just like kind of like a basic slide deck. I'm not really doing that much like interesting creative stuff. It was pretty standard. I did use a template from like the graduate school at Colorado State University, which is great. I mean, that's what they make it for. But I obviously didn't change that much from the basic template. And so it very much to me feels like a very basic simple, really not that special, not that interesting slide deck. I did have at least a few things with some using the morph and the zoom transitions to help, kind of move us through the content, but overall, it's fine. I mean, I'd give myself, a functional score, but definitely I think that it could be a lot better, and I could definitely do a lot better. All right, associates, this was a pretty fun little reaction. It's always good to go back and judge, critique yourself, see how far also you've grown, what you've learned, what you would do differently, even if something is good enough the first time. All right, thanks. Vibes.